welcome to episode 254 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Lydia Creech,
Nathan Smith.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we watched this week in part one. And in part two, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1932's Shanghai Express. But a real quick note before we jump into the movies that we saw this week, I do want to direct everybody to cinematary.com. We have a brand new video essay created by Andrew Swafford. He is asking the question of whether or not Unbreakable, the 2001 or 2002?
It's 2000.
The 2000 M. Night Shyamalan film, whether or not it is a superhero film or is it slow cinema. So it's another fantastic piece by Andrew. He's been working on it all summer. You can find it on cinematary.com or on our YouTube channel. So please check it out. Let us know what you think. We're going to have a little chat for the patrons on Patreon. I'm going to chat with Andrew and it'll be up later this week about the idea for the project, what he learned while researching, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to get in depth on the video essay, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/cinematary. But let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. And before we get into the new releases, Lydia, I'm going to start with you, which you described as a movie that nobody with no male viewers have seen this. It's only been seen by women.
I mean, women. Okay, so if you look on Letterboxd, you can see if you click on a movie, you're like, what of your mutual friends if they've also seen it? And the only people who've seen this movie have been women, as far as I can tell. And Dylan, shout out to Dylan. But the movie is
the ultimate ally. Dylan is the best ally.
The movie is.
I want that Letterboxd list. Only seen by women and Dylan.
Okay, the movie is Stick It, directed by Jessica Benjinger. It's from 2006. Stick It refers to, in the world of gymnastic, like you stick the landing. You do some, crazy balancing or very intense routine, and then you get to the end and you don't, fall over or mess up. You get a perfect 10. And apparently gymnasts really love this movie. It's about the opening scene starts out with these fucking kids on dirt bikes doing some mild property damage and played over a Fall Out Boy song.
Hooligans.
So I was already extremely on board. And it's like one kid is the worst, and then they start running away from the police, and they pull off their hoodie, and oh my God, it's a girl. Why is this girl engaging in juvenile delinquent behavior? And so she gets in front of the judge and you can either go to military academy or this super intense gymnast school, which I guess is a real life choice that juvenile delinquents got in 2006. I don't know. But her dad, I guess, forces her to go to this gymnast school, and it's run by Jeff Bridges, wears his collar popped the whole time.
Oh my God. That just sold me on this movie.
Wow.
It's amazing. And of course, she has this terrible attitude. She doesn't want to participate. She thinks she's better than all these I guess, dumb girls who have been doing really intense athletic training since they were 12 or something. Because that's when you got to start to be an Olympic level gymnast. But she gets her head on right and has some, pseudo father, I guess, bonding moments with Jeff Bridges, and it's tough love, you're gonna do right. And you get this whole backstory about how she was actually used to be an amazing gymnast when she was a child, and then she threw it all away for some reason and doing crimes, I guess. But she gets her head back into the game, and then she and her new gymnast friends that she makes at the school act in defiance at some sort of, I guess I don't know how the hierarchy of competition works in the gymnast world, but it's a big deal. But It's about solidarity. I actually think you would really like it, Nathan, specifically, because one of the points this movie is making is the amount of work that these young women put into their routines, put into training, is absolutely incredible. But you've got this judging system that's based on feels very arbitrary rules. I don't know how the sport's changed since 2006, but the inciting incident for their that sounds condescending, for their rebellion is that one of their teammates does it should be a 10-10 routine, but her bra strap was sticking out of her leotard. And so the judges deducted some points, which is, again, feels very arbitrary, feels besides the point of this amazing athletic display. And so the rest of the girls, both on her team and the other competing teams, get together and they start throwing the competition. Just refusing to even do their whole routine, or they'll deliberately pull the straps of their bras out of their leotards and what, you're going to take off points for this? Fuck you. And it's solidarity. I don't know. One girl is a scab because she wants to win, and so she doesn't participate. And that's a thing that I shouted at the screen. I was a little bit drunk. It's don't be a scab.
Good for you.
But I think they're making...
We'll get you a t-shirt that says that.
But I mean, I think it's making this really great point about the arbitrariness of these competition rules and working together, and also celebrating what these women accomplish. I mean, I assume they actually hired gymnasts to play most of the supporting casts, because also a big part of the movie is, training montages and getting in shape and bathing in ice and falling off the beam and falling off the trampoline and falling on your face over and over and over again. And so it's a real celebration of that, and it's not filmed in a gross way. I don't know how to say this. These are very fit, athletic, young women, and it's the movie's not gross about it. It's very happy to celebrate what it is they're actually doing. And I just really liked it. It's also really funny. There's some boys in it, and you know how every boy in 2006 had that fucking shaggy, dumb haircut like Zac Efron in High School Musical? They had that, and I was yes, I love it. Everybody needed a haircut, but I appreciate it. And I highly recommend it to everybody.
Cool. Is it streaming anywhere, or check it out at the library?
I got it from the library. It might be on Amazon or iTunes for rent. But seriously, everybody should go out and watch it, and not just all my friends who are girls on Letterboxd. I'm going to spread the word. And Dylan.
And Dylan,
yeah. Never forget. Very cool. Well, Nathan, you have 2 new releases, and I'll let you pick whether you want to start negative or positive.
I guess I'll start positive because I have a little bit less to say about this one, and we'll just go ahead and get it out of the way, and we can get into the nasty trash talk. So of the 2 new releases that I have to talk about this week, the one that I'm much more positive on is the reboot of Child's Play, directed by Lars Klevberg, a new director who is thus far most known for the Polaroid-themed horror movie he directed, which remains unreleased in the United States. It was given a release date. I saw the poster in movie theaters. It's been delayed many times. I think it came out in South America, but it hasn't come out here. I don't know why. But since then, he's made this reboot of the 1988 movie Child's Play, obviously the movie that first introduced us to Chucky, one of the iconic slasher anti-heroes, created by Don Mancini. This is one of the longest running, slashers in the game. The Chucky movies are really interesting because they're basically the only major slasher franchise that has maintained a pretty consistent continuity. You could say that, it's sort of the franchise has reworked itself or changed the tone with movies like Bride of Chucky from 1997 and Curse of Chucky, which was the first direct-to-video entry in the series. But those movies were still following the same continuity, same characters, a lot of the same actors. It's also unique because a lot of the major slasher franchises have sort of creative battles behind the scenes to find those franchises. After the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie, the franchise got taken away from Wes Craven, and that sort of affected the trajectory of his career. His bitterness over that sort of influenced his subsequent work. But Don Mancini has stayed the writer on all of these movies until the reboot. He started to direct with Seed of Chucky in 2004, which, if you are wanting horror movies that are very explicitly and out and very queer, horror movies, if that's what you're into, I really recommend Seed of Chucky, which is a fascinating movie about gender and all kinds of good stuff. Don Mancini is one of the few people working in American horror movies, or at least one of the most prominent, who is openly gay. So that's another way that I think the Chucky movies are really interesting. They have this kind of really explicit sort of queer subtext and queerness to them. They're very gleefully sexually deviant. In the original franchise, Chucky is this doll possessed by the spirit of a serial killer, and he basically just gets off on killing, and he's super horny. He has a wife named Tiffany, played by Jennifer Tilly, who is equally horny for murder. This reboot is totally different. It's been somewhat controversial just because Don Mancini and his Chucky franchise is not over. They're going to do a sci-fi series next year. They're hoping to do more Chucky movies. The only reason this movie got made is because MGM owns the rights to the first film in the franchise. So they remade it without his permission. He's been very vocal about his distaste and displeasure with this movie. So going in, I was kind of pitted against it, and it unexpectedly won me over because it's completely different from the original Child's Play and from any other Chucky movie. Like I said, the original Chucky is a doll possessed by a serial killer. This is an AI robot who is, sort of a toy, but also sort of an appliance, who can connect to the cloud, who can connect to the thermostat, to self-driving cars, to all these other forms of technology. The basic premise is kind of the same, though. You have this single mother named Karen, who's played by Aubrey Plaza, who, might I say, has aged perfectly into this sort of early middle-aged single mother, hard-working working class role. She is super hot in this movie, if I can say that. So it was, this movie was enjoyable to me on that front, but I think she's just really funny and good in this movie, and well cast as this sassy mom who is her kid's best friend. So she is this hardworking single mom, has a son named Andy who's sort of picked on at school, doesn't have a lot going on in his life. They don't have a lot of money. So she, to try to make him feel better, brings home this buddy doll, this AI doll. But he's I'm 10, 11 years old. Why, I want a phone. Why do I want a doll? But he sort of befriends the doll anyway. The doll is, a self-learning sort of AI program thing. So it starts as this complete blank slate right and learns based on what it's exposed to. So as opposed to the original Chucky, who is just this like total serial killer, this Chucky is basically completely innocent. He becomes a killer because of what he's exposed to. You know, he watches Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 and he sees kids laughing at the gore and the carnage in that movie, and he says, oh, killing and murder and violence must be funny, therefore I'm going to go out and murder and kill. You know, he hears like swear words and sees, you know, somebody mimic the stabbing from Psycho, and that's how he learns to stab. So he's really, it's a total like nature versus nurture thing, the difference between these two franchises. He's just totally absorbing his environment, which like as an actual sort of critique of technology, of media exposure, whatever, I'm not really crazy about it. I didn't really buy into it on that level. It's, you know, sort of just like a Black Mirror episode, like in terms of the premise. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like I didn't find that critique annoying, even though it's not very effective, because it didn't really belabor any of those points about like media is dangerous, technology is dangerous, it's going to kill us. It was just sort of using that premise as a vehicle for really creative and clever kills. This movie is sort of like takes joy a little bit in killing in a way that I don't feel like I see often in horror movies recently from America. And that sounds like kind of problematic, but I just mean like the setups are very inventive. You know, it's not just like a stabbing or a shooting or something kind of route. It's like really, you know, it's like a Rube Goldberg machine. So I sort of appreciated the sort of the real thought that was put into these set pieces, you know, which almost starts to feel a little bit like a Joe Dante movie or even kind of a Brian De Palma movie, just the way the movie is sort of built around these big set pieces with like self-driving cars gone wrong, you know, like AI-controlled thermostat gone wrong, household appliances gone wrong. You know, it really kind of feels like a Gremlins movie a little bit in that respect. And it's also pretty colorful, you know, it has a sort of like low-key kind of like Giallo, Dario Argento sort of color palette to it, you know, a lot of bold reds and blues and greens, which I really liked. And also Mark Hamill voices Chucky, gives a totally different performance than Brad Dourif in the other franchise. You know, this Mark Hamill is just this like creepily sweet, innocent, you know, like androgynous, angelic child being. And he also, I hope that Mark Hamill wins the Oscar for Best Original Song, because he sings this hilarious little ditty over the end credits that just like had me howling in the theater. So I will say this is like, you know, as far as mainstream horror movies go, pretty good. For as far as reboots go, pretty good. You know, the deck was kind of stacked against this movie for me as a fan of Don Mancini, as a fan of Chucky, but I ended up liking this a lot. It's clever, it's fun, you know, it's not too substantial, but it's, you know, there's some intelligence and some craft in its creation, I think, more than a lot of studio horror movies at the very least. So, you know, whether you are familiar with Chucky or not, I think that this is a really fun time at the good old multiplex. And also I have a new piece up over at theoutline.com about just kind of like a cultural history of Chucky and the sort of anti-capitalist and queer subtext that are running through the Chucky movies. So go check that out.
Yeah, definitely. But the real winner is
yes, another new film. This one I did not feel so kindly towards, did not feel so cuddly about, and that is the movie Yesterday, the new collaboration from two titans of British cinema. One, Danny Boyle, of course, director of films like Trainspotting, Slumdog Millionaire, 28 Days Later, Steve Jobs, Trainspotting 2, The Beach, 127 Hours, Sunshine, millions, or is it billions? I don't remember. I don't know, but it's a Danny Boyle, whatever. I don't think he's a good director necessarily, but he's like always pretty interesting. At least, he's just like Mr. Style, and I think a lot of times he doesn't necessarily know like when excessive maximalist visual flair is really needed, and a lot of times he puts it in like inappropriate places where it's not really called for kind of by the narrative. So it's just like, you have something like Slumdog Millionaire, which is this like shitty westernized facsimile of a Bollywood movie, but is just like saturated to hell and just like trying to be like some kind of like pop art, like Americanized version of a Wong Kar-wai movie or something. Like, it's just like, you have all these flashy colors and stuff going on, but it doesn't really amount to anything. It's just a lot of noise. Anyways, he's teamed up with Richard Curtis, the screenwriter behind such films as Love Actually, Notting Hill, Four Weddings and a Funeral, the Bridget Jones movies, on and on and on. The Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, all those fun little sweet British movies he wrote. Whether you like them or not, some people really like those movies. Other people think they are hot, stinking garbage. I don't know. I mean, like, at one time I was a hopeless romantic in ninth grade, and I thought that Notting Hill was kind of sweet. I don't know if I would like it anymore. Love Actually, I've never seen
heard
in full,
anything good about Love Actually.
I care to. No, neither have I. And like the sequences that I've seen on television look like absolute shit. So the thing is about this movie is that even though it's directed by Danny Boyle, I think that Richard Curtis is really the towering creative force here. I mean, basically that every movie that Danny Boyle has done since Slumdog Millionaire has been sort of a failure. So I feel like he's sort of in director jail a little bit and is just kind of like doing a favor or like just, doing this gig to...
Well, I want to say this was like something that he just kind of filled in, last minute on because he flunked out of the James Bond movie.
Yeah, I think absolutely so. I think he's probably like really just fucking depressed after that shit happened with James Bond, and he's like, I just have to do this like shitty thing that people are going to think is sweet and saccharine and whatever, and that the grannies are going to dig, and like that's gonna get me my career back, after Steve Jobs and after Trainspotting 2 and after 127 Hours and there was another one in there that was like not successful at all. Trance with James McAvoy. Anyways, so this movie Yesterday is high concept to a T. It is about a struggling singer-songwriter of little ditties in a seaside town in ye olde England named Jack Mallock, played by Hamish Patel. He is managed by his lifelong friend who's been in love with him since he sang Wonderwall at the talent show when they were 14 years old. She's played by Lily James. He, of course, is an oblivious buffoon of a man who doesn't realize that she is in love with him. So, he has been for years writing these songs about nice little innocent things, never really gotten very far, played at the local village festival, decides to give it up, and then one day the power goes out all around the world at once for some reason. He's hit by a bus in that time, goes to the hospital. When he wakes up, he realizes he's in this totally different world because of this power outage. Everyone has forgotten that the Beatles exist because he was like out of it during the power outage. He remembers the Beatles. So he realizes that he has a ticket to ride, as they say, a free, so he works 8 days a week to remember the lyrics to every Beatles song. So he can become, a hit singer-songwriter with the tunes of Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, and Starr. And lo and behold, audiences in 2019 love the songs of the Beatles for some reason that is never really explained.
They love acoustic covers of the Beatles.
He becomes a viral. It's very weird. At the beginning, so when he like first is like, I'm going to go debut these songs for the first time. He comes downstairs. He's getting ready to go to this concert, and his parents are like, "Oh, let's hear your new song." So he's like, "I'm going to play Let It Be." And there's this sort of extended sequence where he starts to play. The parents keep interrupting him. The neighbors are ringing the doorbell. The phone's going off the hook, and he starts to play for like the fourth time. He gets interrupted again, and he screams, and he's like, "This is Da Vinci like painting the Mona Lisa. This is the greatest song of all time." So finally his parents shut up, and he starts to play the song. So the movie sort of, experiments for a moment with this idea of like, what if somebody had the Beatles songs, just one guy had the Beatles songs and was going around to birthday parties and shitty little pubs and bar mitzvahs and playing these songs as if he had written them. What kind of reception would they find? And for like 10 or 15 minutes of the movie, everybody's just straight up ignoring this guy, which seems very believable. I feel like if the Beatles did not exist and you were to just introduce their music into the world as it is right now, which is basically the world of the movie, there's only superficial differences between our own reality and the reality of this movie. It goes not far at all with the premise and kind of creating a sort of sci-fi alternate reality. But I feel like if you were to introduce these songs, like say what you will about the Beatles. I was a big Beatles fan at one time. Don't really listen to them anymore, but I have, a respect for their music, whatever. But I think that just the way that their lyrics are written, there's a sort of a sentimentality there that I just don't think would work in the pop market today. And the movie never really finds an explanation. Suddenly overnight, he like becomes a viral sensation. Ed Sheeran picks him to open for him in Moscow. He goes even more viral. He beats Ed Sheeran in a songwriting contest, and then just gets Kate McKinnon playing this like boardroom shark becomes his manager, and it becomes this like music industry parody as he goes to LA, leaves Lily James behind and sells his soul and blah blah blah. And then it just becomes this romance, and it's not really about the Beatles at all. And it's just like disappointing because again, regardless of what you think of the Beatles, I think you can't really deny that they've had a huge kind of impact across music and media and just culture in general around the world. And so the world would be deeply, deeply different on a lot of levels if they didn't exist. Like, not just in the term, like in the way of like, oh, their songs don't exist, but so much about, I think, recording technology might have happened differently. Trends might have happened differently. Genres might not have caught on at certain times. Pop concept albums might not have been a thing. So many artists, Electric Light Orchestra or the Beach Boys, whatever, would have developed differently if the Beatles hadn't existed. So I feel like you could really like create some kind of crazy sci-fi. Instead, the movie just has this repeated joke where Jack mentions something that is not the Beatles, like Coca-Cola or cigarettes or, spoiler, Harry Potter at the end of the movie, and he gets a like confused response, and his friend is like, "What do you mean, what's Harry Potter, mate?" And what do you mean, cigarettes? And there's also this repeated joke where he like asks for Coke, and the person is shocked, and he's like, "Oh, I forgot, only cocaine exists, not Coca-Cola." And it's just like, what the fuck? Like, why aren't you even doing anything with the Beatles? It just doesn't even, it just feels like, it's expecting you to sort of get by on the love story and the sort of allure of the Beatles, the sort of suggestion of the Beatles. Ed Sheeran has more like actual studio recordings on the soundtrack of this movie than the Beatles. And the covers sound like ass. No offense, but Hamish Patel is just like yelling, shouting. There's just like, it sounded poorly mixed to me, just like all this like heavy guitar. And I'm just like, why wouldn't you just go listen to the real Beatles music and just not this shitty facsimile of the Beatles music? I don't know. It's just like, why anyone, what the appeal of this is, makes no sense to me. There are better Beatles movies that were literally made by the Beatles, have the Beatles in them. Go watch those movies. There are better romances, like fucking probably go watch Notting Hill instead of this. Like, oh my God.
Oh, I want to just say that I kind of lump the people who are like really into like this movie and Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody into like the same
fucking Bohemian Rhapsody.
The Bruce Springsteen one that's coming out, Blinded by the Light. That one
like
too.
like all of those. Like you're pretty much in the same category as like the people who go to Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Like it's
just fucking boomer like bullshit. Like it's just for baby boomers, no offense. But the thing is like I feel like this movie is even like disrespectful then to baby boomers, because if you're a baby boomer and you're like, my generation made the greatest music, the greatest culture, this movie doesn't even bother to understand like what actually made the Beatles great. You know, it wasn't just like, you know, some little poetic lyrics, you know, great lyrics, whatever, but it was a lot more than that, a lot more, you know, in terms of style, in terms of technology, in terms of instrumentation, composition, production, on a much deeper and more subtle and I think more influential level. So if like you think that the Beatles are the greatest band of all time, I feel like you'll probably be offended by this movie because it just like takes their influence for granted, doesn't really interrogate their legacy at all, or like, you know, anything. There's just so much that you could do with this idea. Oh my God. And it just doesn't do anything. Ugh.
Well, check out.
I think that the best review comes from my good friend Cameron Austin Collins of Vanity Fair. He says on Letterboxd, if white people aren't going to respect their own culture, why should I? And I think that's like the word on that.
Well, if you would like to read more of Nathan's feelings, he has a review of Yesterday on Pitchfork, so check it out.
Yes, I do.
But we're going to take a short break. We promise not to play a cover of the Beatles from Yesterday, but we're going to take a short break, and then we will be talking about Marlene Dietrich and Shanghai Express. Stick around.
Hey, Cinematary listeners, Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, you know, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So, if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
Episode 254 of Cinematary. In this part, we'll be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1932's Shanghai Express. It was directed by Josef von Sternberg from a script by Jules Furthman. The film stars Marlene Dietrich, Clive Brook, and Anna May Wong. In Peking, China, during a civil war, British Captain Donald Harvey meets his old flame Magdalene and learns with dismay that she has become a prostitute known as Shanghai Lily. Both are traveling to Shanghai via train, and while they grow reacquainted, they remain unaware that they are traveling with spy and rebel army leader Henry Chang. On Chang's orders, his forces attack the train, terrorize the passengers, and hold Donald hostage. Based on Henry Hervey's story Sky Over China, also known as China Pass, Shanghai Express was in turn loosely based on the May 6, 1923 incident in which a Shandong warlord captured the Shanghai to Beijing express train, where 25 Westerners and 300 Chinese citizens were taken hostage. All of the hostages captured in the lynching outrage were successfully ransomed. Paramount studio heads were concerned that the Hayes office kept a close watch on the film due to the portrayal of the Reverend Carmichael and the depiction of the Chinese Revolution. Colonel Jason S. Joy, director of the Studio Relations Office of the AMPP, noted in a letter to Paramount executive B.P. Schulberg that, quote, there is still some apprehension on our part because for 6 or 7 reels, one intensely dislikes a man who is identified with the church. Even after changes were made to make the character more respectable, the Hayes office had reservations about an unfavorable portrayal relating to the minister. Other changes recommended by the Hayes office were to delete the scenes of, quote, human heads hanging from poles in the Chinese street, which are gruesome and will offend a large number of people. Also, such a scene will invite the opposition of the Chinese as revealing the continuation of barbarous practices. In addition, they feared that a remark by Chang in which he says he is not proud of his white blood will be, quote, objected to on the grounds that it shows the white race unfavorably in contrast with the yellow. Which is so much going on.
Oh, they tried.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an airball. A translation of an article from a Chinese newspaper included in the files on the film expressed that the hope that the Chinese consul in the United States would protest the film, as in the newspaper's opinion, the film shows, quote, the darkest side of Chinese politics. Paramount assured the Hayes office that they would consult with the Chinese consulate, but no documentation of such correspondence was found. Shortly before the film went into production, von Sternberg's estranged wife sued Marlene Dietrich, who was having an affair with the director, for alienation of affections, but the suit was later dropped. Cinematographer Lee Garms recalled that the director acted out all the roles during production and insisted the actors imitate him. Quote, his impersonation of Anna May Wong had us all in stitches, but we didn't dare show our amusement. Hervey's story was the basis for Paramount's 1942 film Night Plane from Chungking, directed by Ralph Murphy and starring Robert Preston and Ellen Drew. Paramount remade Hervey's story again in 1951 as Peking Express, directed by William Dietrich, produced by Hal B. Wallace and starring Joseph Cotton and Corinne Calvert. In 1932, The Guardian said, this melodrama the director weakens by mistaking postponement of event for suspense, but the film has compensating strength in the star, who photographs more beautifully than before, and though she is acted off the screen by Anna May Wong, shows herself unique in Hollywood by being majestically beautiful. The New York Times, 1932, said, it is an exciting ride they take in Shanghai Express. Marlene Dietrich's new picture. It has a killing by stabbing, men popped off by a machine gun fire, the revelation as to the real identity of a few passengers, and a romance between a woman of many casual affairs and a British Army surgeon. It is by all odds the best picture Josef von Sternberg has directed. And Pauline Kael, reviewing the film, said, this movie has style, a triumphant fusion of sin, glamour, shamelessness, art, and perhaps a furtive sense of humor. On that note, let's jump into Shanghai Express. And Nathan, I'm going to lead with you because I know that you're a big fan of von Sternberg's work and have been kind of championing this film to get on Young Critics for a while.
Yeah, I, as you mentioned, really, really love von Sternberg. I've seen maybe now 12 or 13 of his films. It wasn't actually the first movie of his that I saw. I saw one of his lesser known movies, An American Tragedy, just because I had the file of it a few years ago and didn't really like it. But I saw 2 years ago the first movie I saw in New York was The Scarlet Empress, which just like totally blew my mind. And I immediately, went home and checked out as many Sternberg movies as I could. So I watched all of the collaborations with Dietrich, although I've actually only seen the Hollywood ones. I still haven't seen The Blue Angel, their first collaboration, which was made in Germany. I've seen a number of The Silence and some of the later stuff. He is so fascinating to me because he is, I think, kind of an anomalous auteur in old Hollywood. And I think that earlier generations of auteurs liked Sternberg. I think that he had a following. But I think that he's somebody that gets neglected a little bit by sort of burgeoning cinephiles when they're getting into old Hollywood. You go to Howard Hawks, you go to John Ford or Lubitsch or Billy Wilder or whatever, but Sternberg, I think, comes sometimes a little bit later. Part of that is just because I don't know if there's like an agreed upon masterpiece. A lot of, all the Dietrich movies are sort of like at the same level of quality, I think, for the most part. And they're all have similar atmospheres and similar sort of, exotic locales, whatever, these kind of moody romances. But, he's also interesting because he escapes. I think the reason why also a lot of people don't get to him first is because he sort of escapes a lot of like easy critical language, because he's not really a montage director. He's not even, the cinematography is gorgeous, but like the cinematography I don't think is necessarily always the key to Sternberg's work. He's like totally 100%, I feel like, about mise-en-scène. There are just all these layers and layers to the image, veils and smoke and like shimmering things between us and Marlene Dietrich's face. And it's just so much about her face, and about the lighting, and the way the shadows fall on her, and the way that she holds the cigarette in between her lips, and whatever. It's just like so much about faces and about the sort of plasticity of the image, the sort of like material, I think, sort of quality, to the image, the production design, all of that good stuff is really what Sternberg, I think, was really interesting. It's just like all very ornate, very just like aesthetic to the max. There is just so much going on in the image, so much in the frame, a lot of bodies too, in the frame. And that's why I think that I really find his work so fascinating, is because it's just like kind of like a tableau, or like, it's just like really painted, a really painted image at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree with you in the way that he like shoots the scenes, especially in this one, where a lot of the sequences in Shanghai Express take place in kind of close quarters, whether it's like on the actual train or when they're, taken off the train and held in this, smaller building complex, as they're being questioned by the revolution leader. And so because it's so like close quarters, you really like see the features and the expressions. Marlene Dietrich is probably the, queen of doing this, and especially in this movie, just the way that she moves her face and reacts to things and doesn't react to things, is really incredible to behold. But also just the other actors. Even the Minister Carmichael character, who just like comes in and is just immediately insulting, like the way that his anger is so, it almost has like this silent quality, is expressed through like the veins popping out in his face. It is kind of beholding to watch. Lydia, how did you respond to Shanghai Express? Had you seen it before?
I haven't seen it before, and I also don't think I've seen any von Sternberg before either, so I had no idea what to expect. I wonder if maybe people come to him late. Because what I know about von Sternberg is that he treated Marlene Dietrich as a muse, and so I wonder if people come to his films not because they're his, but because they like the star persona thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I saw The Scarlet Empress because it was in a Marlene Dietrich series, yes, not a Sternberg series.
And so I was kind of watching it on that level, trying to appreciate the way that she like shrugs or lifts her eyebrows or like doesn't give a shit. I also really liked all of her interactions with Anna May Wong. I thought that was a really good pairing. But as far as like I can't comment on Sternberg as a director.
No, that's okay. I think it's like, there's just sort of definitely with these movies and all their collaborations, there's like equal authorship between Sternberg and Dietrich, and like, you can kind of tell that, the person who is creating this image is really in love with her. But also it's like, so the movie is all, really her, it's just her presence exuding, that sort of she is really just sort of the comet that the movie's orbiting around, like, that the main, her romantic interest
I couldn't give less a shit about him. I was like, who is this dude?
Yeah, he's just like a totally empty person, and that's what I kind of like about, actually, like, I feel like maybe not all of these movies, but I do feel like it's sort of a consistent theme that like the men are just sort of these like blank bodies almost, and they just totally exist to sort of like introduce us into an environment where we can encounter Marlene Dietrich, and that is like their only function. And she is like in love with them, but it's not about like the love between them. It's just about like her displaying and expressing and performing love and romance. It's not, a mutual, it's between her and Sternberg, it's not between the man and the movie. It's like, her out to the camera, to the audience. Not at all the dude that she's supposed to be in love with.
Because it also took me a very long time to figure out what this movie was about, because drinking in these train stations, and it's just like the hub of a busy Chinese city, and like all these different passengers kind of slowly coming together. And by the time we got to like, I keep using the word plotty, I feel like, but just like, this rebellion and being kid, I was like, I don't know. I don't think that's what this is about.
It's just like a kind of, meaningless plot a little bit,
Can I just add to the point that you were just talking about, Lydia, where it has like the characters kind of coming together as you have all these different passengers on the train. One thing I really liked about this movie was that it ends and you can kind of see the immediate like desire to just completely distance yourself from all of these people who you like had this kind of traumatic experience with. Like it wasn't one of those like kumbaya, we've all found something in each other because of this experience we shared. It's everybody's like, they get to Shanghai and everybody hightails it out of there. It was just a nice detail that I was like, yeah, this is probably what you would be like. You would just be like, I just want to distance myself from this experience.
I really liked the old lady also.
Well, she was like an interesting kind of, because I just recently watched Gaslight for the first time, and you have that the nosy neighbor, and
oh my god, I love the old lady in that
nosy,
too.
and so she was like a almost like a parallel version of that character, but I also like how she just recoiled whenever Marlene Dietrich and Anna Wong were just like going, oh, I don't want to be a part of your whatever group you would like us to be in. One of the
just real quick, I also liked the beginning. Everyone thought that Anna May Wong was Shanghai Lily because she's the Asian one.
One of the other things that a lot of people seem to remark about the film, and it actually won an Oscar for it, is the cinematography. This kind of shadow cinematography, which I guess again plays into one, von Sternberg kind of having a film career in Germany around the time when a lot of expressionist work was happening, but two, I think kind of goes along with your point that you were making at the beginning, Nathan, of this movie is lit and just shot so well, and you have these great performances, and so maybe again that's one of those, which seems weird that because of that they wouldn't credit the director, but maybe also like that kind of goes down to, oh, we like the cinematography and the performances, but they don't really necessarily connect that with von Sternberg. I don't know, but that's just something that a lot of people have kind of pointed to as being one of the highlights of this movie.
Yeah, it is. I think it's there's some images in it that just like totally, I think, stand apart from the rest of the movie. I mean, really any time, any of those, classic sort of shots of Marlene Dietrich's face framed, in shadow, in silhouette. There's like that shot of I can't even remember when exactly it happens, what the context is, but it's like hands and shadow and just sort of these just haunting images that I think that remain with you beyond the movie itself, because I think the whole movie and Sternberg's work generally, but especially the Dietrich movies, they're just like so hazy, and extremely dreamy, and there's all this semblance of plot, going around, and like the appearance of plot, and a whole lot of talk about like political situations or whatever, but it ultimately just doesn't really mean anything. It's just this like fog to sort of conjure up this alternate world. This isn't really China. It's just like the movies. It's just, Sternberg, I think, also was really interesting because he wrote about his own work, and wrote a lot. His memoirs, Fun in a Chinese Laundry, are really funny, really fantastic. He just talks shit about a lot of other filmmakers, and he was not afraid to burn bridges, but he was just like very, unapologetically kind of embraced the fantastical properties of cinema, and firmly believed that movies were not reality, that this just was like this totally artificial image, which is why everything is so like lit to death and draped in shadow, and there are all these luscious fabrics and whatnot, because it's just all about like making it as much of an image as possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't watch this and assume this is what Shanghai was like in 1930s.
Yeah, it's like, it alludes to the Civil War, but it's just like a totally vague, hollow, recollection of it. It's not like some actual historical period piece or something.
Well, it's interesting also because I saw that a lot of, I guess, one of the criticisms of the movie at the time was that it kind of had a similar setup to the film that won the Oscar that year, Grand Hotel, in this, they throw all these people in this one space and they, interact, and then that's kind of the story. But I think that all, even though that the narrative kind of has this foggy element where none of it really necessarily means too much of anything by the end, because I also think that the film, like you said, does create this air of moodiness that it's much more of like, it feels like much more of like a long drag of like a cigarette rather than just puffing it really quickly. Like it seems like kind of almost like Marlene Dietrich would do in this movie. It's just like this long drag with this kind of, silver smoke line coming out of your mouth, because it never feels like it's like rushed for anything. It completely is like slow paced and leisurely. I kind of like that about it. It was nice.
Yeah, it really just, I feel like, sort of lets you sit in the smoke and sort of like linger just in a sort of space, in a sort of ambiance for 80, 90 minutes. That's ultimately, it's just like concerned with generating this kind of affect and these sort of, like romantic feelings, I guess. But there's almost something a little bit like, I don't know, mystical about it, I guess, because it feels sort of meditative. It like feels sometimes the haziness of, to bring in something that I'm sure our good friend Andrew Swafford will be happy to hear me talking about. There's like almost something that prefigures the sort of idea of slow cinema, where it's very experiential, but it's like still invested in a very Hollywood kind of idea of like star power, but it's like pure worship, it's like pure cult worship, like laying down at the feet of Marlene Dietrich. It's not just like, this is a beautiful person you're going to spend 80 minutes with. It's like her face is the whole world. Anime Wong's too, but
it feels almost more in line with like what you would expect from like John Ford westerns at the same time, where it's much, something like a My Darling Clementine, where it likes just kind of ruminating in the the quiet moments of this setting. Like,
and it's even a lot like Stagecoach, just kind of bringing these people together in one space.
Which I feel like just the kind of sitting there ruminating in these kind of quiet, tender moments, it seems a little bit off, because in terms of like the genre of this, which seems almost a little film noir-y, especially if you're thinking about like Hollywood noirs at this time, like that's not necessarily the pace that they would take, and so it seems maybe that's kind of makes it an outlier in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that's also an interesting...
It's a little early for noir.
This is an interesting point, though, I think, that you bring up, this kind of like that. This is just, I feel like, kind of like proto-noir, it has sort of hallmarks that I feel like we later go on to associate with noir. But, like so much of the discussion around noir is like, is it a genre? Is it a movement, a mode, a form, whatever, because it's a sort of like weird nebulous thing, because nobody sat down and said, I'm going to make a film noir. It was a thing that was sort of explained and categorized later. So, but I think that these Sternberg movies are interesting because they have a lot of those features. They predate a little bit, but I feel like maybe that, going back to like what we mentioned earlier of like people coming to Sternberg later than they do other old Hollywood directors. I think maybe part of it is like, people come to these maybe even later than a lot of noir films, because you can't really like there's no clear like influence in terms of genre. Noir movies, would go on to influence, thrillers and action movies and, blah, 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 so many crime movies. That's like that whole tradition comes out of that. And like this just feels like something totally kind of different and anomalous, where it's like still really moody, but not cynical or nihilistic necessarily. Like it still has that deep romantic heart. And it also doesn't like, there's not really a clear like genre lineage stemming down from it. There's the aesthetic, similarity to film noir, but there's not like
thematic or
a genre tradition we can put it in, really. It's weird.
Yeah, well, it feels like this almost works as like a bridge going back to von Sternberg's work in Germany, where it bridges almost the expressionist with the film noir, because I think it carries elements of both, but it also, like you said, it there's not really a model that you can look at for this movie to kind of, or a deciphering code to understand, oh, this is one or the other. It's just like this weird middle.
And I think you make a great point also bringing expressionism, and obviously Sternberg and Dietrich first worked together on The Blue Angel in Germany, and so she is German and came out of like the Weimar Republic, that artistic tradition in the 1920s. So like I think that's also like a great connection too, because I think probably she was thinking about a lot of those things with just her facial performance and the kind of the stylization of her face and the makeup. It's a very sort of exaggerated, her eyebrows are very drawn in this sort of severe way that feels like, the harsh edges almost, and like Dr. Caligari or whatever, not that extreme, but there is a sort of a like the face can be manipulated through makeup and light and shadow, like in German expressionism. It's all a malleable plastic thing.
Yeah, well, I'm just a good example is the film From Morn to Midnight, which the main character is this bank teller, and you have like the gates, kind of bars in front of the bank teller stand, but then you have like his face, and they've like done the makeup so it almost looked like there's like indents, like somebody has like punched his face and it's like you know caved in a little bit. And so I don't know too much about her coming up in Germany, but I mean a lot of that Weimar cinema was influenced by like theatrical work by like Max Reinhardt, and kind of creating this this acting tradition that carried over through a lot of the German films were built on just that physicality. So that's why it is this like really strange movie, because it kind of carries some of those elements, but then also fuses with what would become the noir to like feel like this perfect balance of these two genres that influence each other.
It's also interesting, you mentioned John Ford, which I was, like I said, I was thinking about Stagecoach a little bit rewatching this, but it also reminds me a lot of like Ernst Lubitsch movies. Obviously, like, they're both very sexy, but in totally different ways, but they are also this sort of like, exotic, like, even though this isn't China, it's still like very European. The characters and the sort of everything on the train feels like very sort of, dignified and refined, like it would be in a Lubitsch movie maybe. And also the way that you sort of have like, all these people brought together, I feel like really feels like that. I don't know, it's like, it really reminds you to like how, even though this is this totally false, capital E exoticized image of the world, like, that Hollywood had, this sort of international, like, global identity, that you have, all of these immigrants making these movies and, set in all these different places around the world with all different kinds of people. It's like, I don't know, it's very interesting to me that, like, it's just such it's so Hollywood, but also it's so sort of, it's like the Hollywood that I feel like gets buried a little bit. We think about Hollywood as just like American, like, propaganda machine, but this feels like something a little different and a little weirder, that is harder to account for.
Yeah.
So.
Well, any kind of closing thoughts on Shanghai Express before we move on? Nathan, any recommendations on other von Sternbergs to check out if people watch this and liked it?
I think that if you there are two ways that you can go here. If you really like Marlene Dietrich, I definitely recommend maybe doing like the Scarlet Empress next. I don't think you can, after this one, I don't think you can go wrong with really any of them, but I would say probably like the Scarlet Empress or Dishonored or maybe like the really good ones to watch after this. But if you're interested a little bit more in Sternberg, again, you can't go wrong with any of the Dietrich movies. But if you want to look at some of the other stuff, I think maybe my favorite movie by him that's not with Marlene Dietrich is his silent movie, The Docks of New York, which like he made it before he knew her, but it feels like a movie that he could have made with her in it. It's just like deeply romantic and heartbreaking, and really like one of the most just gorgeous silent movies. One of my favorites. I think those, can't go wrong with the Dietrichs, but if you want to try something else, Docks of New York, which I believe is Criterion put it out at some point, so it's out there.
Any last thoughts on the movie, Lydia?
I think I would probably benefit from watching it again now that I know the shape of it, but it's still got a really good atmosphere and really beautiful cinematography and shots. Mm-hmm. And so on that level, it's intriguing. I should check out more von Sternberg is what I'm hearing.
Well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/cinematary, on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/cinematary, where we post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode, as well as Twitter at handle at Cinematary. And then we would like to thank our Patreons. I mentioned at the beginning we'll have some good stuff coming out. Our patrons on Patreon. We got some good stuff coming out on the site. So big thank you to Cam, Chad Newsom, Christopher Metcalf, Maggie, Matthew Lingo, Miranda Barnwall, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Rio Ross, and Will Carroll. We appreciate your patronage and support of Cinematary.com. Next week
we're gonna do our first essay soon.
Oh yeah, we're gonna do our first book club episode soon. So if you have not listened to that episode or want to see some more stuff on that, please head over to patreon.com/cinematary. Next week we're gonna continue our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1939's The Rules of the Game, which Lydia has already watched and was very excited about.
Oh, it's amazing! I can't wait.
Renoir, the GOAT, honestly.
It's genius. I'm so excited.
So look forward to that next week. But until then, thank you for listening.